Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. I noticed it while vacuuming, just a soft rise and fall beneath the rug. Subtle, like the floor was pulsing. At first, I thought it was a draft, but I pulled the rug back, and there was no vent, no crack, no hole, just warm wood and that slow, steady rhythm. I tried stepping on it. The pulse stopped, then resumed faster, like I startled it. It only happens in that spot. Now I avoid it, but sometimes at night I hear something shifting under there. Not pacing, not crawling, just waiting, like it's inhaling for something long overdue. The pattern became my unwelcome companion. Every morning, I'd find myself drawn to that corner of the room, watching the carpet's gentle undulation. The breathing was more pronounced now, almost deliberate. I knelt beside it, pressing my ear to the floor. The sound was hollow, like air moving through a vast cavity beneath my home. But that was impossible. The basement was directly below, and I'd checked it countless times. Nothing but concrete and storage boxes. I started documenting everything. The breathing occurred in cycles, 7 slow inhales, 3 rapid exhales, then a pause that lasted exactly as long as it took me to count to 15. The temperature above that spot was always 3 degrees warmer than the rest of the room. I measured it obsessively, filling notebooks with data that made no sense. The wood itself seemed healthy, showing no signs of rot or pest damage. Yet it moved with the rhythm of something alive. Sleep became elusive. The breathing grew louder during the quiet hours, no longer confined to that single spot. I'd lie in bed, listening to the floor expand and contract throughout the house. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like whispers rising from the floorboards, not words, but something that felt like communication. A language made of creaks and sighs. One night, I decided to confront it. I gathered my tools, a crowbar, flashlight, and my phone to record whatever I found. The breathing spot was more active than usual, the wood flexing visibly under the carpet. I peeled back the rug and positioned the crowbar against the floorboard. The breathing stopped instantly, as if it sensed my intention. The silence was more unsettling than the rhythm had been. I waited, crowbar poised, until the breathing resumed with increased urgency. The wood felt warm against my palm, almost feverish. I pressed harder, and the breathing became rapid, panicked. Something was definitely alive down there, pried up the first board. The flashlight beam revealed only darkness and the musty smell of old wood. But as I removed the second board, a wave of warm air rushed upward, carrying with it the scent of something organic, something that had been breathing for a very long time. The smell was neither pleasant nor foul, just deeply, disturbingly alive. The hole I'd created was perhaps 2 feet square, revealing a space that shouldn't exist. My house had been built on a concrete foundation, yet below these boards stretched a cavity that seemed to extend beyond the reach of my flashlight. The breathing was coming from deep within this space, echoing upward like the respiration of something immense. I lowered my phone into the opening, recording as the camera's light probed the darkness. The space was lined with what looked like pale, fibrous material, not insulation, but something that reminded me of lung tissue. As I watched, the walls contracted and expanded in perfect synchronization with the breathing I'd been hearing for weeks. The realization hit me with nauseating clarity. I wasn't living above a basement. I was living inside something's chest cavity. My phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering into the breathing space below. Its light continued to shine upward, illuminating the underside of my floor, or what I now understood to be the inner surface of some vast ribcage. The breathing quickened, as if my intrusion had awakened something that had been dormant. I scrambled to replace the floorboards, but they no longer fit properly. The breathing had changed, becoming shallower, more agitated. With each exhale, air pushed through the gaps I couldn't quite seal, carrying that organic scent throughout my home. The house began to feel different, warmer, more humid, as if I were now breathing the same air as whatever lay beneath. That was 3 weeks ago. I've tried to leave, but every time I pack my belongings, the breathing becomes labored, distressed. The house shudders with each inhale, and I can feel its need for me to stay. I've become part of its respiratory system, necessary for its survival. The breathing has spread throughout the entire house now. Every room pulses with that same gentle rhythm. I've stopped fighting it, stopped trying to understand what it means. Instead, I've learned to match my breathing to its pattern, to become synchronized with whatever vast organism has made my home its own. Sometimes I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for it to inhale first. Other times, I find myself gasping when its rhythm falters. We're connected now, this thing and I, sharing the same air, the same need for oxygen. I wonder if it dreams when it sleeps, if it's aware of me moving through its body like a thought through a mind. The boundaries between my breathing and its breathing have blurred. I'm no longer sure where I end and it begins. All I know is that I can't leave, can't stop participating in this strange symbiosis. The floor beneath my feet rises and falls with each breath we share, and I've begun to understand that I was never the occupant of this house. I was always just another organ, learning to function within something much larger than myself. Story 2. I never used to think about how often I rest my hands on the walls, absent-mindedly as I pass through rooms. But one day I found faint smudges, my exact handprint, on surfaces I hadn't touched in weeks. They weren't dusty or dirty. They were warm, like the wall was holding on. I cleaned them off, only to find them again later. But wrong, too large or slightly tilted. Then came the fingerprints, multiplying along the hall, following my path like echoes of things I don't remember doing. I think the house is recording me, but not just what I do, what I almost did. The first handprint appeared on the kitchen wall beside the refrigerator. I noticed it while making coffee that morning. A perfect outline of my palm pressed against the white paint. The strange thing was, I couldn't remember touching that spot. I lean against the counter, not the wall. The print was too deliberate, too clean, like someone had pressed their hand there with intention. I scrubbed it away with a damp cloth, watching the faint mark disappear. The wall felt oddly warm under my fingers, warmer than the rest of the surface. I attributed it to morning sunlight streaming through the window, though the spot was clearly in shadow. That afternoon, I found another print. This one on the hallway wall, right at shoulder height. The positioning was exactly where my hand would naturally fall if I were walking and steadying myself. But I don't steady myself when I walk. I never have. The print was slightly larger than my actual hand. The fingers stretched just a bit too long, as if the impression had been made while the wall was soft and then hardened into place. I started paying attention to where I placed my hands. Every surface I touched, I made a mental note. The bathroom mirror while brushing my teeth. The bedroom door frame when entering. The banister on the stairs. I became hyper-aware of my movements, cataloging each interaction with the walls around me. prints kept appearing. They followed a pattern I couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes they appeared in places I had touched, but days after the fact. Sometimes they appeared in places I had only thought about touching. The most disturbing ones were positioned where I had almost reached out but stopped myself, like the wall beside the front door, where I had raised my hand to flip the light switch, but remembered it was broken. The print appeared there anyway, perfectly aligned with my phantom gesture. I began documenting them, taking photographs with my phone, measuring the dimensions, noting the temperature of each spot. The warmth was consistent, always several degrees higher than the surrounding surface. The prints themselves seemed to have depth, as if the wall had actual impressions rather than just stains. The photographs revealed details I couldn't see with the naked eye. In the digital images, the prints appeared darker, more defined. Some showed additional marks, scratches along the edges, as if fingernails had dragged across the surface. But my nails are short, bitten down to the quick. These marks were long, deliberate. I started avoiding the walls altogether. I walked down the center of hallways, kept my hands clasped behind my back, made sure to never let my skin contact any surface. It didn't matter. The prints continued appearing, now with an urgency that felt almost aggressive. They clustered around doorways, multiplied along the stairs, spread across the bathroom walls like a map of every movement I had ever made. The house began to smell different. Not unpleasant, but wrong. Like the scent of skin that had been pressed against something for too long. A warm, organic odor that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I opened windows, ran fans, but the smell persisted. It was strongest near the handprints, as if they were somehow breathing. I tried cleaning them more aggressively, scrubbing with bleach, sanding down the paint, even covering them with new layers of primer. Nothing worked. The prints bled through every treatment, emerging clearer and more defined than before. The wall seemed to be pushing them up from beneath, bringing them to the surface like a body rejecting foreign material. One night, I woke to find prints on my bedroom ceiling. Impossible prints positioned directly above my bed, as if someone had been lying there, pressed against the plaster, mirroring my position below. The prints were inverted, palm and fingers pointing toward the bed, creating a perfect negative of my sleeping form. I moved my mattress to a different corner of the room, prints followed, appearing on the new section of ceiling within hours. They seemed to anticipate my movements, manifesting in places I hadn't even decided to go yet. The wall beside the kitchen sink sprouted a cluster of prints before I had finished washing dishes there. The bathroom mirror showed handprints on its surface before I had approached it in the morning. I began to notice the prints were changing, subtly at first, then more dramatically. The fingers were getting longer, the palms wider. The thumb positioning shifted, becoming more angular, less human. Sometimes additional marks appeared, extra fingers, or impressions that suggested something with claws rather than nails. The warmth was spreading too. Entire sections of wall now radiated heat, as if something alive was pressed against the other side. I could feel it through my clothes when I accidentally brushed against them. The sensation was uncomfortably intimate, like skin against skin contact with something that shouldn't have skin. I started sleeping in the living room, but the prints found me there too. They appeared on the coffee table, the lamp base, even on the television screen. Anywhere I might rest my hand, the impressions materialized. But they were no longer just my impressions. They were evolving, becoming something else entirely. The house was learning from me, absorbing every touch, every near touch, every possibility of contact. It was building a catalog of my movements, my habits, my unconscious gestures. And then it was improving upon them, extending them, making them more than what they had been. I realized the prints weren't just recording where I had touched. They were showing me where I would touch, where I was meant to touch. The wall beside the basement door showed a clear handprint, though I had never even approached that door. The print was positioned exactly where my hand would fall if I were to reach for the handle. I found myself walking toward that door, my hand rising of its own accord. The print on the wall seemed to pull at me, drawing my palm toward its surface. I could feel the heat radiating from it, calling to my skin. My fingers tingled with the anticipation of contact, of finally completing the gesture that had been waiting for me. But when my hand met the wall, it didn't stop at the surface. The print was warm, soft, yielding. My palm sank into it as if the wall were made of clay, and I felt something on the other side press back. Not the firm resistance of plaster and wood, but something alive, something that had been waiting. The wall held my hand there, warm and pulsing. feel a heartbeat through the surface, steady and strong. My own heartbeat synchronized with it, and I understood that the house hadn't been recording my touches at all. It had been teaching me how to touch it properly, how to make contact in the way it needed. All around me, the walls began to warm. Every surface glowed with body heat, and I could see the faint outline of prints covering every inch of space. Not just my prints now, but the prints of everyone who had ever lived here, everyone who had ever touched these walls. The house remembered all of us, held all of us, kept us pressed against its surface, even after we had moved away. I tried to pull my hand back, but the wall wouldn't let go. The print had become a perfect mold of my palm, and I was sinking deeper into it with each breath. The warmth was spreading up my arm, through my shoulder, across my chest. The house was absorbing me, adding me to its collection of touches and almost touches. My reflection in the window showed the truth. I was becoming translucent, my substance transferring to the walls around me. Soon, I would be another impression, another warm spot that future residents would find and wonder about. Another presence pressed against the surface, waiting for the right moment to press back. The walls remember where I've touched them, but now I remember being the wall. Story 3. It started with a smell faintly floral, strangely inviting. Then a taste, as if the air itself changed composition near that one back corner of the room. The rest of the apartment is dry and stale, but that space is sweet, almost addictive. I started sitting there longer, breathing deeper, feeling lighter. But now, when I leave that spot, I feel wrong, off balance. I dream of it, standing in that corner for hours. Last night, I woke up already facing it, already moving toward it, and it smelled stronger, like it knew I'd be back. The corner sits where two walls meet behind my desk, unremarkable, except for the way shadows gather there differently than anywhere else. During the day, light seems to bend around it, creating a pocket of perpetual twilight. The sweetness hangs in the air like invisible honey, coating my tongue when I breathe too deeply. It reminds me of jasmine mixed with something else, something I can't quite place, but that makes my chest tighten with longing. I first noticed it during one of those restless afternoons when concentration felt impossible. I'd been working at my desk, struggling with numbers that refused to add up correctly, when I caught that first hint of sweetness. I turned, expecting to see flowers someone had left, but found only empty space. The scent was strongest chair closer just to understand. That's when I tasted it. Not with my mouth, but deeper, as if the air itself had become something I could consume. The sensation was intoxicating, like breathing in liquid starlight. My shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. The tension behind my eyes dissolved. For those few minutes, everything felt possible again. I began making excuses to spend more time there. First, I moved my reading chair closer to the corner. Then, I started eating meals while facing that direction. The sweetness seemed to respond to my attention, growing more pronounced whenever I focused on it. Sometimes, I'd catch myself unconsciously leaning toward it, drawn by an invisible current. The dreams started soon after. Not nightmares exactly, but something more unsettling. Visions of myself standing in that corner for hours, perfectly still, breathing in that impossible sweetness, while the world continued around me. In the dreams, I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced while awake. When I'd jolt back to consciousness, the taste would linger on my tongue, and I'd find myself already sitting up, facing the corner across the room. I decided to document what was happening. Maybe understanding it would help me control it. I started keeping a journal, recording the intensity of the sweetness, the dreams, the way my body seemed to crave proximity to that space. I measured the temperature near the corner, always 3 degrees warmer than the rest of the room. I recorded the sounds that seemed to emerge from there, a barely perceptible humming, like electricity running through water. The corner began to feel alive in ways I couldn't explain. When I pressed my palm against either wall, they vibrated with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The sweetness would pulse in response to my presence, growing stronger when I approached, fainter when I tried to leave. It was as if the space had learned to anticipate my needs, to call to me when I was elsewhere in the apartment. I started sleeping on the floor near the corner, telling myself it was just an experiment. The sweetness was strongest during the hours before dawn, thick enough to taste without breathing deeply. I'd wake with my fingertips tingling, my mind clearer than it had been in years. But away from that spot, everything felt muted, colorless. Food lost its flavor. Music sounded flat. Even sunlight felt dim against my skin. The journal entries became more frequent, more desperate. I wrote about the way the corner seemed to pulse with its own light during certain phases of the moon. About how the sweetness had developed undertones. Cinnamon when I was sad, vanilla when I was content, something sharper when I was afraid. I documented the way my reflection looked different in the window when I stood in that exact spot, softer somehow, more complete. Other people started noticing changes. My neighbor mentioned that I looked healthier, more relaxed. A colleague commented on how focused I seemed lately. But they didn't see what I saw in the mirror, the way my eyes had begun to hold flecks of gold, or how my skin had taken on a subtle luminescence. They didn't know that I could barely function anymore without my regular doses of that impossible sweetness. I tried to resist it, to prove I could still control my own choices. I covered the corner with a bookshelf blocking access to that space. But the sweetness seeped around the edges, calling to me through gaps between books. I could taste it in my sleep, feel it pulling at something deep in my chest. Within days, I'd moved the shelf back, unable to bear the separation. The corner began to change more dramatically. The walls there started to shimmer when I wasn't looking directly at them, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The sweetness developed texture, sometimes light and airy, other times thick as syrup. I could feel it moving through my bloodstream, settling in my bones, becoming part of my essential chemistry. I stopped leaving the apartment unless absolutely necessary. Everything beyond these walls felt harsh, aggressive. The air outside tasted bitter and thin. Colors seemed too bright, sounds too sharp. Only in my corner did the world make sense. Did I feel truly alive? I began to understand that this wasn't just a phenomenon I was observing. It was a transformation I was undergoing. The final entry in my journal describes the night everything changed permanently. I woke to find the corner glowing with soft, pearl-like light. The sweetness had become so concentrated it was visible, swirling like smoke made of honey and starlight. When I approached, the walls began to ripple like water, and I realized they weren't walls anymore. They were boundaries that had become permeable. I reached out to touch the light, and my hand passed through what should have been solid matter. The sweetness rushed into me like a tide, filling every cell, every thought, every memory. I tried to pull back, but my body wouldn't obey. The corner was pulling me in, or I was dissolving into it. The distinction had become meaningless. Now I understand why the air tastes sweet. It's not air anymore. It's something else entirely. Something that's been waiting patiently for me to notice, to come closer, to finally surrender. The apartment looks the same from the outside, but I exist in the spaces between its atoms now, sustained by sweetness that flows through dimensions I never knew existed. Sometimes I sense others walking through what used to be my home. They pause near the corner, confused by a faint floral scent, a barely perceptible sweetness on their tongues. They'll dismiss it at first, but one of them will return, drawn by curiosity, by that subtle addiction that grows stronger with each breath. The corner is patient. It has all the time in the world, and the sweetness is always waiting, always ready to welcome the next person who needs to taste something beyond the ordinary, something that makes the impossible feel inevitable. I'm still here, in the spaces between breath and hunger, between wanting and having. The sweetness sustains me, flows through me, has become me. And I'm content to wait in this corner of forever, tasting eternity one sweet breath at a time. Story 4. I've lived in quiet places before, but this is different. This silence isn't passive. It feels curated, placed. There are moments of absolute stillness that move from room to room, as if something is dragging the silence with it. If I speak in one room, I hear no echo. If I move to another, even my breath sounds loud. I tried playing white noise. The silence swallowed it, not muffled, erased. I think it's not just quiet in here. I think something is choosing, where I'm allowed to hear myself. The first week, I convinced myself it was the architecture. Old houses settle differently. Sound travels through walls in unexpected ways. But then, I noticed the refrigerator's hum would fade completely when I entered the kitchen, only to return when I left. The heating system would go silent mid-cycle, as if holding its breath until I moved to another room. I started mapping it. Room by room, I documented where sounds occurred and where they vanished. The pattern made no sense. The silence wasn't consistent. It shifted. What had been loud yesterday became muted today. The floorboards that creaked under my weight last week now cushioned my steps with an unnatural softness. My voice began to change too. In the living room, it sounded hollow, like speaking into a well. In the bedroom, it felt compressed, as if the walls were pressing the words back into my throat. I started recording myself reading the same paragraph in different rooms. When I played the recordings back, my voice sounded like it was coming from different people. Same words, same inflection, but something fundamental was altered in each space. The smell started in the basement. Not musty or damp, something clinical, like the air after a thunderstorm, but trapped inside. It would appear in random rooms, always faint, always just noticeable enough to make me turn my head. I followed it through the house, but it led nowhere. Sometimes it would vanish the moment I acknowledged it. Other times it would linger just long enough to make me doubt my own senses. I tried bringing friends over. They noticed nothing. Their conversations flowed normally. Their laughter echoed properly. But I could see their mouths moving slightly out of sync with their words, as if the house was delaying their voices by fractions of seconds. When I mentioned it, they looked at me strangely. They heard nothing wrong. The shadows started changing after the second week. Not dramatically, just enough to catch in my peripheral vision. The shadow cast by the kitchen table would extend slightly further than it should. The one from the hallway lamp would bend at an impossible angle. I took photographs, but the camera captured nothing unusual. The shadows looked normal in the images, but wrong in person. I bought a sound meter to measure the silence. The readings made no sense. Some rooms showed complete absence of sound, negative decibels, which shouldn't be possible. Others registered frequencies that human ears can't detect. The device would malfunction in certain corners, displaying error messages in languages I didn't recognize. The walls began to feel different. Not visibly, but when I pressed my palms against them, they seemed to pulse with a barely perceptible rhythm. The temperature would shift under my touch, cold spots that moved like slow water under the surface. I started sleeping with my hand against the bedroom wall, trying to understand the pattern. The rhythm matched no heartbeat, I knew. One evening, I heard typing from the room above me. Consistent, purposeful keystrokes. I live alone, and there's no computer upstairs. When I climbed the stairs, the sound stopped. The room was empty, but the air felt recently disturbed, as if someone had just left. I found a single sheet of paper on the floor, covered in text I had written, but couldn't remember writing. It was my handwriting, describing rooms in my house that don't exist. The silence grew bolder. It began to move while I was watching, flowing from one corner to another like thick liquid. I could track its progress by the way sounds died in its wake. My footsteps would become muffled as it passed under me. The air itself seemed to thicken where the silence pooled. I stopped sleeping properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the house rearranging itself around me. Not the furniture, the space itself. Distances between rooms felt different when I walked them in darkness. The hallway stretched longer than it should. The bathroom door appeared where the closet used to be. In the morning, everything would be back to normal, but the taste of displacement lingered. I started recording everything. Hours of audio from different rooms, photographs of shadows, detailed notes about temperature changes and strange smells. The evidence was mounting, but it made no coherent sense. The house wasn't haunted, it was learning, adapting, responding to my presence by changing the fundamental rules of how sound and space behaved within its walls. The final recording captured something I still can't explain. I had placed the device in the center of the living room overnight. When I played it back, I heard myself speaking for 6 hours straight, describing things I had never seen in rooms I had never entered. My voice was calm, methodical, as if I was documenting a different house entirely. I have no memory of speaking those words. I moved out 3 days later. The silence followed me to the door, but stopped at the threshold, as if bound by invisible rules. I could feel it watching as I loaded my belongings, patient and hungry. The new place is different. Sounds behave normally. Shadows fall where they should. The air tastes like air. But sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I wake to find my room completely silent. Not the natural quiet of sleeping neighborhoods, but that same curated emptiness. I hold my breath and listen for the familiar sound of silence moving, rearranging itself around me. It hasn't found me yet, but I can feel it searching. The house taught it my patterns, my rhythms, the specific shape of my presence. I think it's learning to travel now, to follow the patterns of silence I carry within myself. Some nights, I catch myself walking through my new home with the same careful steps I used in that other place, as if I'm still trying not to disturb something that's learning to be everywhere I am. Story 5. I don't keep much in there, just coats and an old box or two. But one night, I opened the door and found an object I'd never owned yet recognized completely. It was mine. I could feel it, like a future memory folded into the wrong place. I picked it up and had a brief, painful vision, me dropping it, running, bleeding. I put it back. The next day, there was something else, familiar again, something I haven't lost yet. I haven't opened the closet since, but I feel it adding to itself, preparing. The first object was a brass key with teeth I'd never seen before, yet my fingers knew exactly how to hold it. The metal was warm against my palm, impossibly warm, as if someone had been clutching it moments before. When I touched it, a sharp pain shot through my temple, and I saw myself fumbling with a lock, my hands shaking, blood trickling down my wrist. The vision lasted only seconds, but the metallic taste lingered in my mouth for hours. I placed the key back on the shelf, nestled between two winter coats that hadn't been touched in months. The fabric felt different now, rougher, almost alive under my fingertips. I closed the door and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild after a long day. But sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about that key, about the way it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. The next morning, I avoided the closet entirely. I dressed from the dresser, grabbed my jacket from the chair by the door. But as I walked past, I heard the softest sound, like fabric rustling, like something settling into place. I pressed my ear to the door and heard nothing, just the steady hum of the building's ventilation system. Yet underneath that familiar white noise, there was something else, a whisper of movement, barely there, but insistent. That evening, against every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone, I opened the door again. The key was still there, but now it had company. A small leather journal, its pages yellowed and worn, lay open beside it. My handwriting filled the visible page, but the words were foreign to me. I read about sleepless nights, about doors that wouldn't stay closed, about a growing certainty that something was watching. The final entry was dated 3 weeks from now. My hands trembled as I lifted the journal. The leather was soft, molded by countless hours of handling. I recognized the dent in the cover where I always pressed my thumb, the particular way the binding cracked when opened. But I had never written these words. I had never owned this journal. Yet here it was, saturated with my touch, my thoughts, my fear. I flipped through the pages and found sketches in my own hand, rough drawings of the closet, of objects I didn't recognize, of a figure standing in shadows. The figure's face was obscured, but something about its posture made my skin crawl. In one sketch, it was reaching toward me. In another, it was holding something out, offering it. I slammed the journal shut and shoved it back into the closet. But as I did, my fingers brushed against something new, a small glass vial filled with dark liquid. The moment I touched it, saw myself mixing something in a kitchen I didn't recognize, my movements quick and desperate. The liquid bubbled and hissed, and I heard my own voice whispering urgent instructions to someone I couldn't see. The vial was ice cold, cold enough to burn. I dropped it, and it rolled behind the coats, the dark liquid sloshing with a sound like whispered secrets. I closed the door and backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air in the room felt thick, charged with an energy that made my hair stand on end. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress was manifesting in elaborate hallucinations. But the objects felt real, solid, undeniably present. And more disturbing than their existence was their familiarity. Each one felt like a lost memory fighting its way back to the surface. I decided to document everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording, narrating what I saw, what I felt. But when I played the recording back, my voice sounded strange, distorted, as if I was speaking through water. And in the background, barely audible, I could hear something else, a low humming, rhythmic and hypnotic. The next day brought a new addition, a silver locket tarnished with age. Inside was a photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, yet her eyes held a familiarity that made my chest tight. She was standing in front of a door, the same door I'd been sketching, the same door that appeared in my dreams that I was only now beginning to remember. I started keeping a journal of my own, documenting each new object, each strange sensation. But the more I wrote, the more I realized my words were beginning to match the journal from the closet. I was writing my way into a future I had already lived, or was about to live, or was living in some parallel fold of time. The closet began to emanate a subtle warmth, like a fever spreading through the wood. The air around it shimmered occasionally, just at the edge of vision. When I pressed my palm against the door, I could feel a gentle vibration, as if something inside was breathing. The objects were multiplying faster now. A worn photograph, a broken chain, a child's toy I remembered losing decades ago, but had never actually owned. I stopped opening the door, but I could hear them in there, a soft shuffling, like things rearranging themselves. The sounds were almost musical, creating a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I found myself standing outside the closet for long periods, listening, waiting for something I couldn't name. The breaking point came when I heard my own voice from inside the closet. Not a recording, not an echo, but me speaking in real time, having a conversation with someone I couldn't hear. My voice was urgent, pleading, explaining something about the objects, about time folding in on itself, about how I needed to remember before it was too late. I ripped the door open and found myself face to face with a mirror I had never owned. But it wasn't reflecting the closet. It was showing me a room I didn't recognize, with walls covered in sketches and photographs, all connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. In the mirror, I saw myself standing in that room, holding the brass key, about to unlock something that should have stayed closed. The mirror me looked directly at me through the glass and mouthed a single word: "Run." I slammed the door shut and stumbled backward, but the word echoed in my mind, growing louder and more insistent. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle, then another, building a barricade. But even as I worked, I could feel the objects inside multiplying, pressing against the door, demanding to be acknowledged. Now I sit on the floor across from the closet, watching the door bulge slightly outward with each breath of the thing inside. The objects have become a collection, a museum of my future losses, my inevitable mistakes. I can feel them calling to me, promising answers, promising completion. The brass key is the loudest. It whispers about doors that need opening, about truths that need revealing. The journal rustles with pages I haven't written yet, documenting events I haven't lived through. The vial glows softly in the darkness, its contents shifting and changing color. I know I will open that door again. I can feel the certainty of it like a weight in my chest. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because the objects aren't just mine, they're me. Pieces of a future self, fragments of choices I haven't made yet, echoes of a person I'm becoming. The closet contains something I haven't lost yet. But I'm beginning to understand that I'm not the one who will lose it. I'm the one who will find it, pick it up, and carry it into whatever darkness is waiting behind that door. And when I do, I'll finally understand why that mirror me looked so afraid. Story 6. I tested it. Same sentence, same pitch, same speed. But each room gives something different back. In the hallway, the echo is delayed, hesitant. In the kitchen, it's sharper, almost angry. But in the bathroom, it doesn't echo at all. It repeats, quietly, a beat later, slightly changed, like something there is practicing how I speak. I've started talking less, listening more. I think it's getting better at imitating me. And worse, I think it's starting to use my voice when I'm not in the room. The discovery began with a phone call that cut out mid-sentence. The dial tone stretched longer than usual, carrying an odd resonance that made my teeth ache. I hung up and tried again, but the line was dead. That's when I noticed the silence in my apartment felt different, thicker, more attentive. I spoke aloud to test the quiet. Hello. The word came back from the hallway, but not immediately. It hung in the air, then returned with a questioning lilt I hadn't given it. I walked to the kitchen and repeated the test. This time, the echo was immediate, harsh, as if the walls themselves were irritated by my presence. The bathroom was where things became truly wrong. I said hello again, softer this time, and waited. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to leave, I heard it, my own voice, coming from the mirror, whispering the same word back to me. But it wasn't quite right. The inflection was off, like someone trying to remember how I sounded. I began documenting everything. Each room, each word, each variation. The living room made my voice sound tired, older. The bedroom returned my words with a breathless quality, as if something had been running. The closet. I hadn't expected the closet to have any acoustic properties at all. Gave back my voice in fragments, scattered syllables that reformed into something almost recognizable. I recorded these sessions on my phone, playing them back to confirm what I was hearing. The recordings were clean, normal. My voice sounded exactly as it should. But in real time, in the physical space of my apartment, the distortions continued to grow more pronounced. The smell started on the third day of my experiments. Copper, sharp and metallic, but only when I spoke. It would bloom in the air around me, then fade as soon as I fell silent. I tested this too, speaking single words in different rooms, noting how the scent intensified near certain walls, particularly the one that separated my bedroom from the unit next door. I pressed my ear to that wall and whispered. The surface was warm, warmer than it should have been, and beneath my cheek, I could feel the faintest vibration, like a heartbeat or breathing. I pulled back, but the wall retained the impression of my face, a slight depression in the paint that shouldn't have been possible. The lights began to dim whenever I spoke loudly. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. The apartment would grow slightly darker, as if something was drawing power from the fixtures. I tested this methodically, speaking at different volumes, noting how the brightness corresponded to my vocal intensity. Whispers barely affected the lighting. Shouts made the bulbs flicker like dying stars. My reflection in the bathroom mirror started to move independently. Small gestures at first, a turn of the head when I was looking straight, a mouth that continued moving after I'd stopped speaking. I would catch these movements in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly, everything appeared normal. The mirror showed only what it should show, yet the wrongness persisted. I began to hear my own voice when I was certain I wasn't speaking. Muffled conversations coming from the walls, using my exact intonation, my particular way of emphasizing certain syllables. The words were indistinct, but the voice was unmistakably mine. I would press my ear to different surfaces, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The breakthrough came when I realized the apartment was learning my speech patterns. Each room had become a different aspect of my vocal identity. The hallway held my hesitation, my uncertainty. The kitchen contained my anger, my frustration. The bathroom was practicing my casual conversation, my private thoughts spoken aloud when I thought no one was listening. I stopped speaking entirely for 2 full days. The apartment grew restless during my silence. Doors would creak open slightly, then close. The temperature would fluctuate without cause. Water pipes would tick and settle in rhythms that sounded almost like language. The refrigerators hum shifted pitch, cycling through tones that resembled human speech. When I finally broke my silence, the change was immediate and terrifying. Every room responded simultaneously. My voice echoed from all directions, but not as echoes, as conversations. The apartment was speaking to itself, using my voice, discussing things I had never said, revealing thoughts I had never shared. I tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. The lock turned, but the door remained sealed, as if the frame itself had warped to prevent my departure. I pulled and twisted the handle, but the metal was ice cold despite the apartment's growing warmth. Through the peephole, I could see the hallway beyond, normal and accessible, but unreachable. The walls began to pulse with that same rhythmic vibration I had felt before. The apartment was breathing, and it was breathing with my lungs. I could feel my own respiratory pattern echoed in the structure around me. When I held my breath, the building held its breath. When I exhaled, the walls seemed to sigh with relief. I am still here, still testing, still documenting. The apartment has learned to mimic my voice perfectly now, and I hear myself having conversations I never had, making plans I never made, expressing feelings I never felt. The reflection in the mirror moves independently most of the time now, speaking words that don't match what I'm saying. The most disturbing realization came yesterday. I was listening to one of my recorded sessions, and I heard something I hadn't noticed before, a second voice, speaking in perfect unison with mine. Not an echo, not a repetition, but a duet. Something had been speaking with me all along, learning not just my voice, but my thoughts, my intentions, my very sense of self. The apartment doesn't just echo my voice anymore. It has become my voice. And I'm beginning to suspect that the person I think I am might actually be the echo, the copy, the thing that learned to speak by listening to something else entirely. The original voice is still here, somewhere in these walls, and it's been waiting patiently for me to realize that I am not the one who moved in. I am the one who was always here. Story 7. They're faint, dusty, the size of bare human feet, upside down, pacing gently from corner to corner. I first noticed them after a night of heavy sleep, too heavy. Since then, they've returned every few days, always different positions, sometimes stopping right above my bed. I tried cleaning them, but they smear into patterns, symbols. I took photos, but the prints never show. I tried sleeping in another room. They followed. Now I don't sleep. I just stare upward, waiting for a step to fall. The apartment feels different now. The air carries a metallic tang, like copper pennies left in rainwater. My fingertips pick up vibrations through the walls when I press them against the surface. A rhythmic pulsing that shouldn't exist in a building this old. The wood grain beneath my palms feels warm, almost alive, as if something flows beneath the paint. I started keeping a journal, recording everything. The footprints appear most frequently during the quiet hours when the building settles. They begin small, barely visible impressions, then deepen as if someone invisible grows heavier with each step. The pattern is always the same, corner to corner, then a pause directly above where I rest. A perfect outline of toes, arch, heel, human, but wrong somehow. My neighbors haven't noticed. I asked casually about ceiling maintenance, about sounds from above. They look at me with that particular expression people reserve for questions that don't make sense. The woman next door mentioned she sometimes hears soft scratching, like fingernails on wood, but attributed it to settling pipes. She doesn't look up when she talks to me anymore. The electronics in my home have begun to misbehave. The radio catches fragments of whispered conversations in languages I don't recognize. The voices sound urgent, repetitive, as if trying to communicate something important. I've recorded hours of these transmissions, but when I play them back, I hear only static. My phone displays text messages from numbers that don't exist, strings of symbols that hurt to look at directly. I purchased a ladder, climbed up to examine the ceiling closely. The surface appears normal until I focus on the areas where the footprints manifest. There, the texture shifts subtly. The paint seems to breathe, expanding and contracting in microscopic movements. When I touch these spots, my fingers come away clean, but the sensation lingers. A cold that spreads up my arm and settles in my chest. The building's architecture makes no sense now that I really examine it. The ceiling above my bedroom should be someone else's floor, but the apartment above mine has a different layout. I've checked the building directory, studied the floor plans. The space directly above my bed corresponds to a closet in the upstairs unit. A closet that, according to the tenant, has always been sealed shut. The door won't open, she says. Has never opened since she moved in. I started sleeping on the floor. The footprints adapted, appearing lower, closer. They began manifesting on the walls now, traveling impossible paths that defy gravity. I can almost predict their movement, a slow, deliberate patrol that follows the perimeter of the room before converging on my location. The steps have developed a rhythm, a cadence that matches my heartbeat when I'm most afraid. The patterns they leave when I try to clean them have grown more complex. No longer simple smears, but intricate designs that seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. I've traced them onto paper, but the drawings never capture what I see. The symbols appear flat, lifeless on the page, missing some essential quality that makes them significant. My reflection in the mirror has started showing inconsistencies, small details that don't match. the angle of my shoulders, the position of my hands. Sometimes I notice myself looking upward in the reflection while I'm looking straight ahead. The mirrored version of my room contains ceiling stains that don't exist in reality, dark patches that correspond exactly to where the footprints appear. I decided to stay awake completely to catch the moment of manifestation. I positioned myself with a clear view of the ceiling, camera ready, eyes fixed on the spot where the first impression usually appears. The waiting stretched endlessly. The air grew thicker, more oppressive. Then, in my peripheral vision, I saw it, not the footprint forming, but my own feet, somehow visible above me, pressing down from the other side. The realization hit like cold water. I was seeing myself, inverted, walking on the ceiling from below. But I was sitting perfectly still. I looked down at my feet, then up at the ceiling. The footprints pressed deeper, and I felt the pressure in my own soles, as if I were standing on something solid above my head. I stood up. The footprints on the ceiling stood up. I took a step. They took a step. Perfect synchronization. But I was on the floor, and they were on the ceiling. And somehow, we were the same person occupying impossible space. The apartment has become a loop. I walk the floor, and I walk the ceiling. I sleep below, and I pace above. The boundaries between up and down have dissolved, leaving me suspended in a space that folds in on itself. I can feel myself walking overhead, can sense the weight of my own footsteps pressing down on my upturned face. The journal entries have started appearing in handwriting that looks like mine, but isn't quite right. The words describe experiences I don't remember having, conversations with myself that I never held. The other version of me, the one who walks the ceiling, seems to be documenting the same phenomena from a different perspective. We're both trapped, both searching for an exit that doesn't exist. I don't know which version is real anymore. The one who stares up at footprints, or the one who leaves them. The boundary between observer and observed has collapsed entirely. I am both the mystery and the one trying to solve it, both the haunted and the haunting. The footprints are appearing now even when I'm not in the room, even when I'm not home. They've become independent, continuing their patrol without me. Or perhaps I've become independent of them, splitting into fragments that exist in different orientations of the same space. The apartment breathes around me, walls expanding and contracting with each step I take. both on the floor and on the ceiling. The two versions of myself are converging, growing closer with each passing day. Soon, I think, we'll meet in the middle, in that impossible space between up and down where the footprints live. I'm waiting for that moment. We both are. Story 8. It's subtle, a fraction of an inch at a time. But the frame around the bedroom door is widening, taller, narrower. I measured it twice, then again. The numbers keep changing. I placed tape at the top corners. By morning, they were peeled downward, like the house is pulling it open to fit something else. I stopped closing the door, but now, even fully open, it casts a shadow like it's half shut. I think the doorway's not expanding for me. I think it's making room for something larger than me to come through. The first sign wasn't the measurements. It was the way the air moved through the frame. A draft that shouldn't exist, carrying the smell of wet concrete and something metallic. I stood there breathing it in, trying to place the scent. It reminded me of the taste you get when you bite your tongue too hard. Copper pennies left in rain. I pressed my palm against the wooden frame. The surface felt normal, painted white, slightly textured from years of touch-ups. But underneath, barely perceptible, there was a tremor, like the wood was breathing. I held my hand there longer, counting the rhythm. It didn't match my heartbeat. It was slower, deeper, more patient. That night, I left my phone recording on the nightstand, pointing toward the doorway. I needed proof. Something to show myself in the morning that I wasn't imagining the changes. The audio captured nothing unusual for the first few hours. Just the settling sounds of an old house, the distant hum of the refrigerator, my own breathing shifting between sleep cycles. But around the middle of the recording, there was something else. A sound like fabric being stretched tight. Slow, deliberate. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I played it back a dozen times, adjusting the volume, trying to isolate the frequencies. Each time I heard it, the sound seemed to come from a different direction. First from the doorway, then from inside the walls, then from somewhere above my head. I started keeping a notebook. Measurements, observations, sketches of the door frame from different angles. The proportions were definitely changing. The height increased by 3/4 of an inch over the course of a week. The width stayed constant, but the depth, the thickness of the frame itself, was growing. Like the house was adding layers, making the passage more substantial. The shadows were the worst part. even in full daylight, with every light in the room switched on, the doorway cast darkness that didn't match the geometry. I held a flashlight directly at the frame, watching the beams scatter and bend in ways that hurt to look at. The shadow it threw on the opposite wall was wrong. Too wide at the base, too narrow at the top. Like it was the silhouette of something standing in the doorway, something taller and broader than any person should be. I tried filling the space, moved furniture against the opening, stacked boxes, even hung a thick curtain. But every morning, everything was moved aside. Not violently, carefully, as if someone had politely relocated my barriers to make room for their passage. The furniture wasn't damaged. The boxes weren't crushed. They were simply elsewhere, arranged neatly against the far wall. The smell grew stronger. That metallic, wet concrete scent mixed with something organic now. Like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I followed the odor through the house, trying to locate its source. It seemed to emanate from the doorway itself, but also from the walls around it, from the floorboards, from the air conditioning vents. The entire structure was exhaling this strange perfume. I called a contractor, told him I was having structural issues, that the door frame was warping. He came out with his measuring tape and level, examined the frame from every angle. He found nothing wrong. The measurements he took matched the original blueprints perfectly. He showed me his numbers, confident and professional. But I could see the frame bending around his tools as he worked, adjusting itself to match his expectations. After he left, I stood in the doorway and screamed, not from fear, but from frustration. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing off surfaces that shouldn't exist. The echo lasted longer than it should have, and when it finally faded, I could hear something else. A response. Not quite a voice, but a sound that wanted to be one. It came from the other side of the frame, from the space that was supposed to be my bedroom, but felt increasingly like somewhere else entirely. I started sleeping in the living room, but even from there, I could hear the doorway working. The sound of wood stretching, of space expanding, of something patient and inexorable making room for itself. I would lie on the couch and listen to my house reshaping itself around in presence I couldn't see but couldn't deny. The tape I'd placed around the frame wasn't just peeling anymore. It was being systematically removed, piece by piece, always while I was looking away. I would turn my head for a moment, and another strip would be gone. Not torn or damaged, simply absent. as if it had never been there at all. One morning, I woke to find footprints in the dust around the doorway. Not human footprints. Something larger, with a stride that was too long, too wide. The impressions were deep, as if whatever made them was heavier than anything that should be walking through my house. I photographed them, measured them, tried to trace their path. They led from the doorway to the kitchen, then back again. A circuit, a patrol. I covered the prints with flour, hoping to catch fresh impressions. By evening, the flour was undisturbed, but the original footprints had changed. They were deeper now, more defined, and there were more of them. A whole series of tracks, circling the doorway like something was learning to navigate the space, testing the boundaries of its new territory. The frame is still growing. Each morning brings new measurements, new proportions. The shadow it casts has developed texture, depth, almost substance. I can see details in the darkness now, suggestions of form that my mind refuses to fully process. Something that fills the expanded space perfectly. Something that has been waiting patiently for the doorway to accommodate its true dimensions. I don't go near the bedroom anymore. I don't need to. I can feel it watching from the enlarged threshold, patient and satisfied. The house has finished its modifications. The doorway is complete. And now, every night, I listen to the sound of something much larger than me finally coming home. Story 9. It looks like the room, mostly, but if I watch the reflection closely, the differences show. A chair turned slightly wrong, a shadow that falls too slowly. Once, I saw something move across the reflected hallway that wasn't in mine. I turned around, empty, but the reflection froze for a second, like it hadn't expected to be caught. Now, every night, I sit by the window and compare. More and more mismatches appear. I think the window is showing something real. But not here. Not now. Somewhere that looks like me, but isn't. The first irregularity appeared during a routine evening. I was organizing papers on my desk when the peripheral vision caught something off. The reflection of my bookshelf showed a book's spine facing backward. But when I looked directly at the shelf, everything was normal. I rubbed my eyes, blamed fatigue, and returned to my work. But the wrongness lingered like a persistent itch. The window faces the courtyard, a perfectly mundane view of concrete and scattered vegetation. During daylight, the reflection barely registers against the outside world. But when darkness falls and the interior lights create a perfect mirror, that's when the discrepancies emerge. subtle at first. A plant pot positioned differently. A picture frame tilted at an angle that doesn't match reality. I began documenting these anomalies. A notebook filled with sketches, comparing what I saw in the room versus what the reflection showed. The differences were consistent. The reflected chair remained turned 15 degrees to the left. The shadow from my desk lamp fell at an impossible angle. These weren't random distortions or optical illusions. They were deliberate, purposeful alterations. The reflection began responding to my attention. When I moved closer to examine a discrepancy, the reflected version would shift slightly, as if adjusting to avoid detection. The wrongness became more pronounced. Books appeared and disappeared from shelves. A coat hung on a hook that didn't exist in my actual room. The reflected carpet showed stains that weren't on my floor. I tried covering the window with a blanket, but the reflection persisted underneath the fabric. The mirror surface seemed to exist independently of the glass itself. When I held up objects to compare their reflected versions, they appeared normal. The anomalies only affected the room's static elements, the furniture and fixtures that defined the space. The smell started around the same period. A faint metallic scent that seemed to emanate from the window itself. Not rust or copper, but something organic and unfamiliar. It intensified when I focused on the reflection, as if my attention was feeding whatever process was occurring. The odor clung to my clothes and followed me throughout the house. Sleep became elusive. I found myself returning to the window repeatedly, drawn by a compulsive need to document every discrepancy. The reflected room was evolving, becoming more distinct from reality. New furniture appeared. The walls showed different paint colors. The reflected ceiling had water stains that didn't exist above my head. Then I saw the figure, a shadow that moved independently through the reflected hallway. Not my shadow, but something else. It paused at the reflected doorway, seeming to observe me just as I observed it. The shape was human, but wrong, proportions subtly distorted. When I reached toward the window, the figure retreated deeper into the reflected space. I began leaving objects as experiments. A red pen placed on the windowsill. In the reflection, it appeared blue. A cup positioned at the window's edge showed up as a completely different object, a small wooden box. The reflected world was translating my reality into its own language, converting everything into alternate versions. The temperature around the window dropped noticeably. My breath fogged the glass, but the reflection showed no such condensation. The surface felt warm to the touch, almost alive. When I pressed my palm against it, the reflected hand appeared to be touching something else entirely, a different texture that made my skin crawl with phantom sensations. The breakthrough came when I realized the reflection wasn't just showing an alternate version of my room. It was showing an alternate version of my life. The figure in the reflected hallway wasn't a stranger. It was me, but different. The wrong shadows, the misplaced furniture, the altered objects, they all belonged to a version of myself living in a parallel space. I began communicating with the reflection. Hand gestures, written notes held up to the window. The other version responded, but always with variations. When I waved, the reflected figure nodded. When I held up a piece of paper with "hello" written on it, the reflection showed text that appeared to read something different, though I couldn't decipher the alternate words. The barrier between the two realities began weakening. Objects started appearing in my room that originated from the reflection. A pen I'd never owned. A book with pages that felt wrong under my fingers. These items carried the metallic scent, infecting my space with the otherness of the reflected world. I tried to break the connection, hammering at the window with various tools, but the glass remained intact. The reflection persisted, showing my alternate self attempting the same actions with different tools, achieving the same futile results. We were trapped in parallel frustrations, mirror images of helplessness. The final confrontation happened when I saw the reflected version of myself approaching the window from the other side. We stood facing each other, separated by the thin barrier of glass and reality. The other version pressed their palm against the surface, and I felt compelled to do the same. The moment our hands aligned, the boundary dissolved. The sensation was like touching ice and fire simultaneously. My fingers seemed to pass through the glass, making contact with the alternate reality. The other version's hand felt different, the skin texture wrong, the temperature alien. Through that contact, I experienced flashes of the other world, similar but fundamentally altered. A life lived with subtle but crucial differences. When I pulled my hand away, the reflection had changed permanently. The other version of myself was no longer there, Instead, I saw my own reflection, but it was wrong. The face was mine, but the expression was different. The eyes held knowledge I didn't possess. The reflection had become independent, showing not what I was doing, but what I might do, what I should do, what I was becoming. Now I understand the window was never showing an alternate reality. It was showing my true self, the version that exists beneath the surface of consciousness. The mismatched furniture, the wrong shadows, the altered objects, they were all manifestations of the differences between who I am and who I believe myself to be. The metallic scent has become part of my natural odor. The wrongness has infected my actual room, making everything feel slightly off. I can no longer trust my own reflection in any mirror. Each surface shows me differently, revealing aspects of myself I'd rather not acknowledge. The window still shows the discrepancies, but now I am part of them. Sometimes I catch myself moving in ways that don't match my intentions, as if the reflection is now controlling the original. The boundary between observer and observed has collapsed completely. I continue documenting these changes, but the notebook writes itself now. Words appear that I don't remember writing, describing events I don't remember experiencing. The reflection has become the reality, and I am merely its imperfect copy, trying to match something I can never fully become. The window remains, showing everything and nothing, revealing truths too complex for simple understanding. I am both the observer and the observed, the real and the reflected, trapped in a loop of self-discovery that offers no escape, only deeper descent into the mystery of what it means to truly see oneself.